Assalamu alaikum, my name's Farouk, and welcome to this Get Together, Muslims and Addiction Part 2, How I Control My Addictions. Now, if you haven't checked out my other video, What Muslims Need to Know About Addiction Part 1, I recommend you do so before watching this video so that inshallah you have proper context. I put a link in the description below. Just in recent years, there's been a growing interest in the role of neuroscience in understanding addiction and its triggers. I'm going to show you a strategy that I use on a daily basis that helps me keep a challenging addiction under control. Now, why would I say I'm going to show you the strategy that I use? Why do I still need it? Why haven't I beat the addiction once and for all? Well, addiction has a dark secret, and knowing the secret may shock you, but inshallah, it'll also empower you. May Allah reward you for being curious. Let's tie our camel. Now, I'm sure you've heard the word triggered. It's used all over the internet, but usually in the context of anger. So when someone refers to being triggered, they're referring to someone getting triggered into a kind of rage. I'm not referring to that kind of trigger. Inshallah, I'm going to discuss addiction triggers, which refers to an internal or external stimuli that leads to a person's addictive behavior. Internal and external stimuli being the two ways in which dopamine is triggered to push us toward an addictive substance or behavior. I think it might help if we go into some examples of internal and external stimuli, then I'll share my own story and how I keep them under control. There may be some overlap from the previous video, but this could be good to help drive home the points. So there's three examples of internal stimuli. The first would be emotions, specifically strong emotions like stress, anxiety, depression, and loneliness. Those emotions can trigger addictive behavior as the brain's reward system releases dopamine in response to these emotions. Then we have trauma, where traumatic experiences, be it verbal or physical abuse, psychological or emotional neglect as a child, can cause the brain's reward system to release excessive amounts of dopamine, leading to addiction, because it causes individuals to seek and recreate the pleasurable feelings associated with the initial dopamine surge. And finally, genetics. Some of us are just born with certain genetic factors that make us more susceptible to addiction by affecting the way the brain processes dopamine. Now, it's important to know that genetics don't have to define us. Many professionals like to give the example of genetics being the gun and our diet and lifestyle and environment being the trigger. Now let's look at some examples of external stimuli. I'll give 4. Number 1, drugs and alcohol. Substance use can cause an overstimulation of the brain's reward system, leading to addiction as individuals seek to recreate the pleasurable feelings associated with the substance they're using. Number 2, social environment. Peer pressure, social norms, and cultural factors can influence addictive behavior by promoting substance use as a way to fit in or cope with stress. An example of this would be trying to avoid sweets at a get-together. It's important to really understand that you are the average of your friends. The Prophet ﷺ said, "A man follows the religion of his friend, so each one should consider whom he makes his friend." This includes who you want to become as a person in regards to health, income, and family. I'll have a video on this topic soon, inshallah. Number 3, technology. The use of technology, such as social media, video games, or online gambling, can lead to addiction as the brain's reward system is activated by the pleasure associated with these activities. And then 4, food. Highly palatable foods, such as those that are highly refined, containing seed oils, carbohydrates, MSG, and sugar, can activate the brain's reward system, leading to addiction-like behaviors such as compulsive eating and excessive snacking, often referred to as grazing. Now, keep in mind that when I use the word compulsive, I'm referring to the inability to resist said substance or behavior, not to be confused with obsessive compulsive disorder. All of these types of stimuli trigger dopamine when we're thinking of their associated substance or behavior. For example, with sugar, an internal trigger might be anxiety or feeling hangry. An external trigger might be something like seeing a soda or donut. These internal and external triggers release dopamine, making you susceptible to eating it, even though it's bad for you. We'll even eat it knowing we're going to feel terrible or bloated afterwards. Then add to that shaitan whispering to us to eat it. It can often feel unbearable and too hard to resist. And yes, shaitan promotes all behavior and actions that are harmful to us, even our bodies. He's our open enemy. In fact, his first complaint when refusing to prostrate to Adam alayhis salam was based on a type of physical arrogance, him being made from fire and Adam being made from clay, and Allah knows best. So we can actually use this understanding to our advantage in helping us control our addiction. One of the positives of addiction is that what works to control one can work to control many, because the most common addictions play on dopamine. So all of these types of addictions can be reined in with behavioral changes. All right, now let's talk about my own addictions. I acquired several in my Jahiliyyah. I know it's not good to expose my shortcomings from my Jahiliyyah, seeing how Allah forgave me when I reverted to Islam, but I feel compelled to share at least one from my past so that you know I'm speaking from experience and not just writing a prescription. And so you know that I can truly empathize with what you're going through because I've been there and done just about anything you can think of before Islam. That said, of these addictions, I'm going to focus on one because, like I said, strategies that work for one work for most of them, inshallah. So what did I struggle with? Nicotine. I used to smoke many years ago, starting at the age of 14. And the longer I smoked, the more I thought I'd never be able to quit. It's very difficult to quit. And again, as much as I don't want to expose my previous shortcomings, I want you to know that with the hope that you stay away from them, be it cigarettes, vaping, or hookah. Inshallah, you're not dealing with nicotine, but maybe this video can help you control another substance or behavior. And again, the same technique I used to quit nicotine, which is extremely addictive, I used for keeping other addictions in check. I'll mention the other one shortly. The first step in containing my addiction, which won't sound very profound, was deciding once and for all to quit. You can't want to quit just because someone told you to or because it's bad for you, because you may not be in the emotional context of even caring. This is the beauty of video. If you don't really care right now, inshallah, maybe one day you will. And these videos will be here for you when you do, inshallah. For me, I was just tired of being a slave to nicotine. I didn't like that it controlled my behavior and money. So by finding my why, and with Allah's help and a lot of trial and error, I found the solution to quitting, alhamdulillah, for now. More on that shortly. First, I had to recognize my triggers and then avoid them, just until I was in the clear. So once you've identified your addiction, find your triggers, the pre-events or thoughts that make you crave the addiction. What cues do you receive that remind you of your addiction, producing dopamine? This will take being in the moment and being mindful of your feelings and thoughts in that moment of craving. For me, with smoking, my triggers were others smoking, talking on the phone, after a big meal, when hungry, while drinking coffee, while bored, when stressed, and during or after a get-together. So you can see that having that many triggers, I was basically triggered to crave nicotine all day. Now let's see how we can apply this to, let's say, a sugar addiction, which many of us are. So using sugar as an example, okay, for your friend, not you, some triggers might be when others are eating or drinking sweets, during gatherings, while drinking coffee or tea, after a meal, when stressed, when tired, when bored, when hangry, and after physical exertion. Do any of these sound familiar? I found that triggers for smoking are very similar to sugar. Why? Because most addictions create the same addictive pathways and pleasure centers in the brain, causing the production of dopamine. Then, once you've identified your triggers, again, you want to avoid them just until the physical cravings subside to a controllable degree. And you may need to dig in initially, but I promise the physical cravings will pass, inshallah. It usually takes between 3 to 6 days for the physical cravings. After that, it's all mental, which is what we're going over now. So let's continue with the sugar example. In the beginning, you may need to forego get-togethers, especially if people give you a hard time. You know who you are. They may not understand and they may think you're just on a diet to lose weight, but after a while, you'll get used to it. Some will carry it for years, but it's all good. You know who you are. And Allah knows, inshallah, maybe they'll get motivated to quit or at least cut back on sugar once they see the health benefits that you're experiencing. Second, if you have to have sugar in your coffee or tea, try cutting back slowly until you're down to a teaspoon, then half a teaspoon, then switch to monk fruit or stevia. I personally don't like stevia, but if you're good with it, then go for it. I like to use a little heavy cream in my decaf because it's a little sweet, but without the sugar. That's right, I said decaf. Do not use artificial sweeteners like NutraSweet, Splenda, or aspartame. These are harmful chemicals that accumulate in your body because your body can't combust them for energy. They are strongly linked to ADHD and gut issues. So using monk fruit and stevia, you'd be using a substitution until your addiction, sweet tooth, is under control. Third, when stressed or bored or experiencing any internal or external triggers, tell yourself to wait 20 minutes. This strategy helps a lot, especially for people like me who are impulsive. This distracts your mind just enough to slow the production of dopamine, which drives the craving. Plus, telling yourself that you can't have something will only make you want it more. It's like saying, don't think of a polar bear. What'd you think of? So if you're thinking I can't have a soda, I can't have a cookie over and over at home or at a get-together, what are the last words in your mind? Have a soda. Have a cookie. I'll have another video on the importance of how we structure our words and their effect on our actions in another video, inshallah. So instead of saying I can't have something, I actually tell myself that I can have the soda or cookie, but I choose not to. And if I'm still tempted and the dopamine is firing away, I'll tell myself to wait 20 minutes, allowing me to free my mind and think of something else. You're simply putting it off. And 20 minutes is usually the amount of time for the temptation to pass. And because our actions tend to follow our predominant thought, it's also very beneficial to make dhikr during the 20-minute wait. It keeps your mind focused on Allah and not temptation. It's nearly impossible to turn off our inner dialogue, but we can control it with dhikr. It's hard to think of two things simultaneously and coherently, so waiting 20 minutes and making dhikr is key. It also protects us from shaitan from trying to tempt us, because remembering Allah is like stiff-arming shaitan in the face. If you can, I recommend going for a walk during the 20 minutes. The combination of endorphins and serotonin release during the walk and putting your mind on something else really helps, inshallah. Which brings us to number 4, meal prep. Prep as many meals as possible so that when you're hungry, you won't grab junk food. Preparation is key. Number 5, out of sight, out of mind. Make unhealthy choices invisible. Many of us have family, and not everyone in the family is ready to give up sugar. But one thing we can do is make sure those foods are away in the pantry or a safe, depending on your situation. If you have a second fridge in the garage, put it in there so you don't see it when you're going in the main fridge. And if you're single and living on your own, don't buy junk food. Okay, so now, after identifying our triggers and having a strategy to harness the addiction, it's just one day at a time, 20 minutes at a time, one salah at a time. And don't beat yourself up if you give in. Brush it off and keep striving. Otherwise, dopamine and shaitan will paint you into a corner. And if your first addiction to work on is processed food and sugar, bread, pasta, and rice included, don't underestimate how powerful this addiction is. You may be in denial at first, as with most addictions, thinking that you just like bread and pasta too much, or it's too hard to quit because of your family. These are all excuses. Try and get yourself into the emotional context of caring about yourself and living out a quality life with your family. So all that work with the triggers that we just went over and waiting 20 minutes, I cracked. About 4 years ago, I was finally able to get sugar and refined carbs under control, and I did strict keto for about 6 months. Back then, keto was healthy, mostly meat and eggs and select vegetables. This was before the food industry got in on it and started providing keto junk food. I lost 45 pounds and put my decade-long battle with anxiety disorder in remission. I was sleeping great and overall felt fantastic. Then one day I felt the cravings again, not from an apparent stress. My pain disguised itself as boredom. You see, I used to sabotage myself when things were going well. It would always seem too good to be true. So instead of getting let down, I'd make things uncomfortable for myself. So when things were going good, be it work, my health, my finances, I'd get uncomfortable. I'd get bored. Add to that shaitan whispering to me to have just one little treat meal, because again, he hates for us to have any meaningful progress in life. So here I was feeling amazing, and the hardships of my bad health prior to keto long gone in the rearview mirror. Time heals, and I'd forgotten how bad it was. Kind of like when a mother is in labor and thinking she's never going to have kids again. But inshallah, time heals, and eventually most mothers will have a longing for another child. And one of the worst aspects of my health prior was my anxiety disorder, as I mentioned. Not only would I battle with anxiety and panic attacks almost on a daily basis, but I was also waking up in the middle of the night with anxiety, which always ended up with me pacing around the house with a full-blown panic attack. Walking is part of anxiety and panic, hence fight or flight. There's nothing to fight, so you gotta go. They've actually added freeze now, so it's fight or flight or freeze. So here I was after all the progress, bored. So I thought to myself, I can have a bite or two of this pizza. I looked around to make sure my kids weren't looking, because they keep me in check. Whenever they see me eating something that's not part of my everyday norm, they'll ask, Dad, is that keto? But no one was around, so I took a bite. As soon as I bit into that slice of pizza, it was like my brain lit up. The universe made sense, and all of the world was in harmony as the dopamine rushed within my brain. And I was once again comfortable feeling uncomfortable because I broke my streak. And then I thought, while I'm here, I may as well eat this cupcake that my wife brought home from the masjid. I was binging. And that brings us to addiction's dark secret. Why, after all that time, 6 months of eating clean, did I give in? Because the pathways in our brain that are paved by addiction may never go away. They lay in the cut, waiting for us to get stressed, anxious, or in my case, bored. It picks up right where it left off when we quit, even if it's years later. So back to my binging incident. When we slip up and relapse, or what we like to call a cheat meal to feel better about ourselves, to our brain, it's like we never stopped in the first place. Studies such as those done on rats, which are very close to humans in many types of studies, have shown that changes in the brain due to addiction can be long-lasting and in some cases permanent. These changes involve the brain's reward system, including the dopamine pathways, and can persist even after a period of abstinence, which contributes to the chronic relapsing nature of addiction. So if you find yourself slipping up over and over, don't give up. It will get easier as time goes on. The key is to not give up, inshallah. As for myself, I had to get back on my keto horse and start over. Whatever your addiction may be, food, internet, gaming, music, whatever brings pleasure, dopamine is there wanting more, along with shaitan cheerleading it along. But just remember that we're created to fall off the wagon, so that we then turn to Allah for forgiveness. Don't let dopamine, addiction, and shaitan convince you that you're a lost cause or too weak to win, because winning isn't being perfect. Winning is throwing your hat, kufi, or hijab in the ring and trying. The beauty of Islam is that its foundation lies in prevention, which even according to science is key when dealing with addiction, because it's far easier to avoid addiction than it is to acquire one and then control it. Inshallah, if you found this beneficial, please be sure to check out this video on addiction and relationships. It's part 3 of this series, where we see how even the sugar addiction can not only harm ourselves, but also our relationships. May Allah reward you for being curious and keep tying your camel. Assalamu alaikum.